Welcome to Your Epic Pursuit. I'm Mike Mooney, and this is a space where we dive into inspiring and real conversations with people to explore their journeys of leadership and performance. And we're going to do that through the epic lens, epic being excellence, presence, intentionality, and curiosity. And you're going to hear threads of that throughout the conversation today. But our goal is really quite simple. We want to provide you with unique insights, frameworks, ideas that are going to help accelerate your pursuit in life or in business, however you can apply this. And today, I am just thrilled to have a guest with us, Carl Thomas, who's become a new friend, a great friend. Carl has over 30 years of leadership experience in building high performance teams. He's a global C-suite growth strategist, focused on marketing and sales, business development, global innovations, entrepreneurialism, just a fantastic background. And one cool fact about Carl that I've come across is that he's actually been inducted into the USA Triathlon Hall of Fame and the World Triathlon Hall of Fame for lifetime achievement. And he's a young man, so there's got to be a great story behind that to get a lifetime achievement. But that was for his pioneering work in sports marketing and event production. Aside from that, though, Carl's heart and passion and what he's been building most around has been a platform called the Best Boss Ever, a very popular podcast that he has out where he's discussing all types of leadership strategies, effective leadership, management styles, keys to success to help people like you and me get better at the craft that we have in leadership. And Carl, I have to say, with all that you've done and all that you are doing, I'm just thrilled that you could carve out time to have a conversation with me and our audience today. So thank you so much.
Mike, it's my pleasure. These kinds of things for me, and I know for you, are labors of love to a degree, because we've got so much water under our collective bridges, right? That insights and nuggets and wisdom that we picked up all along the way, living it live, so to speak, I think is so beneficial to our listening audience. So I couldn't be happier to be here with you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. As a fellow practitioner, right, and not theorist, I often tell folks, like, I'm a practitioner of these things. What I'm sharing with you, what you're hearing are ideas that I put into work, and you're doing the same and have done the same, So thank you for that. So to kind of kick off, it's an interesting sort of transition that you're in right now. We're talking before the show about where you are, and it led to this question I was thinking through regarding leadership. And we're talking about leading through uncertainty and sometimes uncertain times, and how often that leader is setting the tone. In your case here, recently, you've had an exit from an organization that you find yourself in a place where there's still a bit of responsibility, I would think, in your heart and your head for the team that you've built that is going to remain with the organization. I'm just curious about your leadership approach, the things that you're thinking through during a time like that, where you're in an exit, but your team that you have a connection with is remaining to still see the company through. What's going through your mind? What are the things you're talking to them about?
No, that's a part of leadership that doesn't get addressed very often. It's always typically about, well, what are you doing now? You're leading this group, or you're running this company, or you're running a division of a company, whatever. That's actually a whole lot easier than what you just described, which is the uncertainty of what's coming next. So in most recently, you're correct. We did exit. I say we because there were a number of senior execs, my peers, who also exited the company. But the interesting part to that is it took from the original announcement over 12 months for the acquisition to actually finalize. So there was a whole year where there was this cloud, if you will, of uncertainty of what was going to happen next. And through that, we still had a collective job to do. So addressing that uncertainty not only in a larger team format environment,
Yeah.
but individually, because there were several of us on the team that managed groups of people within the larger team.
Mhm.
So I was always and have always been very sensitive to the unknown.
Yeah.
What aren't we hearing? What can't
Mhm.
we see? What might be coming down the pike that we're not aware of?
Yeah.
And sometimes, Mike, and in many cases, there aren't any answers to those
I
questions.
was gonna say the few playbooks that if they exist, are going to play out right, chapter
That's
and
right.
verse. It's
That's
very
right.
fluid. It's very
Yeah,
fluid.
it's totally fluid. So in that particular scenario, it was an ongoing leadership initiative and
Mhm.
requirement. And it turned out that the preparation
Mhm.
in that lead up to the acquisition becoming final was super helpful because we had quelled a lot of fear, quelled a lot of uncertainty, and
Mhm.
essentially said, listen, we have a collective job to do. We can't forecast what might happen, what's going to happen, but what we can do is control each day where this team has a requirement, a goal, a budget to hit, numbers to hit, all those kinds of things. And we actually did a really good job of keeping the entire team very focused on the task at hand. So we let the
Right.
chips fall, and the chips did fall. And as we were exiting the company, there were two of us in that if you will, summarial leadership role. We both had kind of a different take on the hows and whys and wherefores. We were completely aligned on the fact that this was a team that we had built from scratch. It's a
Mhm.
super solid team that fundamentally to a one, they really didn't have anything to worry about going forward, even though we were leaving the company. And I think for the most part, that has been true.
Mhm.
It was 10 months ago, 9 months ago. So, so far, so good. But
Uh,
you are right. There is no playbook for that.
There's no playbook, and I'd have to imagine one of the key components, and maybe you can unpack it a little bit more for us, is communication. I'm a huge believer that it's not only what leaders say, what you choose to say in those times of uncertainty, but it's also the cadence in which you're saying it, right? And I found too often and seen too often where a leader finds themselves in a situation where there's uncertainty. They say something to the team one time, and in their mind, they've said it enough, and they're going about their business. And yet, below them, around them, this vacuum is starting to compress fears and compress ideas and compress rumors that suddenly, people will either start becoming the self-fulfilling prophecy
Exactly.
of the fear. But I would imagine like your communication, what you're saying and in the cadence was really important during this time so that you were keeping a close connection to the team to keep them focused so that they could maintain the momentum even after you all did that final exit 9, 10 months ago.
Yeah,
So what was
no, that's a super important point. And the good news for the group that was, if you will, still intact for the most part, the culture that was built because the team was built from scratch
yeah,
was one of accessibility, transparency, frequency of communication. Listen, we didn't have all the answers.
right,
And there was some part of, as you know, corporate hierarchy where you know something, but you are being asked or expected to not divulge
right,
information until it's time.
right,
So, with those things taken into account, the good news here is there was an open door, so to speak, or an open phone line, or an open text thread, or an open email thread that every single team member knew and I think trusted that they could reach out individually or two or three, didn't matter.
mhm,
Availability, accessibility, and to a certain degree, vulnerability I
yeah.
think are hallmarks of effective leadership, and that's what we tried to engender.
Yeah, and the important part of what you said in that it's It's like that old adage, when was the best time to plant a tree? 25 years ago. And when's the next best time? Today, right? It's
Right.
no different in culture, and I love the fact that you said you built that culture before you needed to lean into it, right? So it was already there to be leveraged, and it wasn't something new on top of everything else. That's fantastic. I really appreciate that insight for sure. Carl, let's shift gears for a hot second here, and I'd love to maybe get into another area of the conversation. Maybe it was related in this experience with your team or in prior experiences as a leader with other organizations. But you've been in a lot of environments where there's high pressure, there's a high pace, the momentum you've got to maintain. I'm sure there were times that you or maybe even your team were hitting the wall, and the need for performance was still front and center. So I'm curious if when that time may have happened for you as a leader, or maybe it just happened to you individually, but what did you do that may have even seemed a bit unconventional, or that really worked, that got yourself or the team to the other side to be able to keep your performance where it needed to be?
Yeah, no, that's a super good question. Um, Germain with the Tour de France live, literally, as you and I are recording this,
Yeah.
five-time winner Eddie Merckx, he's the old OG guy back in the day, um, said simply one thing: how do you win the Tour de France 5 times? And his answer was lead from the front. So taking leading from the front as the sort of touchstone, if you will,
Right.
earlier in my career, and I'll get into more elaboration on this in a couple of minutes, I created, as the vice president of marketing at Speedo Swimwear back in the day,
Mm.
a triathlon format that became the Olympic format. And we can talk a little bit about that in a second. But
Okay.
when you are putting 2,000 or 2,500 live people through a triathlon course where it's swim, bike, run, and 2,500 people get into Lake Michigan, which was the case in Chicago,
Right.
you are, holding your breath, no pun intended, in the
Hmm.
swimming, that all 2,500 people get out of the water. Okay.
Right. Right.
And I reference Lake Michigan because there was a moment in time in Chicago where we had the course all set up the day before the event. We had our, several of our teammates out there late into the night, and
Mm.
about 1 a.m. in the morning, blowing off the lake is this massive thunderstorm, and the winds hit ridiculous levels, and it took down scaffolding, it cratered the finish line, it washed tents out into Lake Michigan. Literally, the site was demolished, and I got that call at
Yeah.
1 a.m., and I immediately left my hotel room, went to the site, and led from the front. Did I know how to put everything back together? Absolutely not. But here's what I did know: we needed to get it good enough to have 2,500 people show up at 6 o'clock in 5 hours
Mm.
and be able to have the time of their life, so to speak, and compete in an event that might well have been a bucket list event or a once in a lifetime event for them. And
Yeah.
we did it, and the whole team was trashed by 5 o'clock in the afternoon because everybody had been up all night, you know, literally building it from scratch. But that was one moment, and I think, you know, my sense is that because the founder, president, and CEO was there in shorts and getting sweaty, it helped.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't fabricate those types of experiences to create those. And I would say, those are the crucible moments, I call, right? Where you were going to grow stronger as a team, like none other, because you're there shoulder to shoulder in some of the worst times. But when your leader shows up there to do it with you, and isn't just directing. I'm sure you weren't playing air traffic control. Like you said, you were in there getting sweaty, lifting, building. Let's figure it out.
Right.
You know, I also love the idea too of let's get it good enough instead of perfect. Because a lot of times leaders get stuck on it's got to be perfect and it's got to be the way it was before, yet you were dealing with a time crunch. There's a reality of how much you could truly do. And I also really admire the refocus on the participant, the athlete's experience and their perspective of being a bucket list. It's something they've been training for. We want it to be as good as it can be given what's happened to us at 1 a.m, right?
Exactly. And the good news is that the thing blew through, in 90 minutes. So by the time everybody was showing up at 6, 7 in the morning, the weather had calmed, the sun was coming out. So it was almost like nothing had happened. But
Yeah.
as the triathletes were getting to the start line, we made sure that our PA announcer let everybody know that there had been this blast that came through in the middle of the night, and
Mhm.
that it's not perfect. But you're still going to have a great time. All the aid stations are going to be there. You're going to get what you need to drink when you need to drink it. The transition area is all set up. The marshals are here. Medical tent is in order. So everything is good.
The things that are important to you as the competitor, we have handled. There were some
That's
of the
right.
other aesthetic things that would have been great for TV or the other pieces. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're going to be all right. They're going to be all
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's great too. To also manage expectations as well, right? Get to be proactive with the communication. It's okay to tell people, that hey, this is what we just went through for your benefit.
That's right.
That is fantastic insight. So again, you think about times as leaders, and sometimes we find ourselves at these crossroads where we're thinking of, well, we have to make a decision, and we're thinking through, what do we know in the head? What do we know in the heart? What are we feeling in the gut? Because we typically go through those checklists as leaders to see, what are we getting from insight? What are we feeling about it? What are we truly, from our, internal perspective, where do we think we should go? But was there a time where you, maybe again as an individual and when you were leading, you were at one of these crossroads, Carl, and there was a direction you felt like you needed to go or take the team, lead them toward, yet it was one where maybe most of the team or others were questioning if that was really the right decision. Maybe even you yourself were thinking, maybe, is this the right decision? So I'm just curious if you could, you know, talk through that and what that experience was like, and how did that help your leadership journey? What lesson did you learn from that?
Right. Well, yeah, that's a really good question. And I do have a very good story about that. So, one of the things that has been a touchstone for me from my earliest days is the Goethe quote, right? Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has power, genius, and magic in it. So that's a quote that's almost 400 years old.
I,
I
I, I'm
carried, I carried the,
First time I'm hearing it, so I'm gonna need
oh,
to look
wow.
that up. Yeah,
So
truly.
check it out, look it up. I wrote that quote down, put it on the back of my very first business card in the world of business, and it happened to be with Speedo Swimwear, and that's where the story begins. So I was fortunate, Mike. I was a scholarship athlete at UCLA. I swam and played water polo there. I played a couple of years on the U.S. national water polo team. I swam in a couple of Olympic trials. I never made the Olympic team, but the whole Olympic movement was very close to my sort of DNA, if you will, the
Mhm.
ethos with which I sort of went forward. So here I am as the vice president of marketing at Speedo Swimwear. I read a story in Sports Illustrated. Barry McDermott was the author, and he wrote about this crazy event in Hawaii called the Ironman Triathlon.
Mm.
So I read the story, and it's a gruelathon, right? It's 2.5 miles in the ocean. It's 112 miles on a bike. It's a full marathon. It takes people 12 or to 18 hours to complete. And I say to myself, wow, that's it's aspirational at best, doable, not by many. Okay. So this is called the better mousetrap theory. I'll use that as a sort of imprimatur here. So I looked at that format and I said, this format will never see the light of day. I was wrong about that because it's still a thing. Um, but I think if we took that format and we restructured it, swim, bike, run, still in that sequence, but
Yeah.
made each part of the triathlon a very doable and recognizable distance for what I'll call the weekend warrior.
Mhm.
And that's what I did. And I was the VP at Speedo at the time. And I had a delightful boss who said, yeah, give it a try, but I was an army of one. And a lot of people were looking at me and saying, what are you doing and why are you doing it?
Wow.
So the
Well,
backstory,
a question though, hold on. If I can pause for a second on that, Carl. What was the alternative? Like were you trying to reformat an existing event? Because you weren't going to do you weren't going to do the
right,
Ironman. So you were just trying to come up with something that might be a little more relatable to,
way more relatable.
yeah, right?
Not
Right.
a little more, way more
Not a
relatable.
little, way
Right,
more. But it was going to be something that was going to be a new format. It wasn't
correct.
replacing something that you
No,
had.
no,
No.
this was a
Okay.
brand new format. It was a brand
Great.
new format, and there's some methodology behind this. As the VP marketing at Speedo Swimwear at the time, Speedo was really only recognized as a competitive aquatics brand worldwide.
Mhm.
Competitive swimmers or competitive divers or competitive water polo players are the only ones who sort of used a Speedo, unless you were on, the Côte d'Azur and Nice and you were running around in Speedos, right? Uh,
Right.
that said, what triathlon offered was a platform for the Speedo brand to speak to runners and cyclists.
Right.
And runners and cyclists and swimmers at the time were the three most widely participated in sport in terms of exercise and a sort of weekend warrior, right?
Mhm.
Uh, so that was the premise from a marketing perspective on how and why I was able to convince leadership at Speedo to allow me to get into it. We launched the series. It ran for nearly 14 years. I was at the 1984 Olympic Games where I, as the co-founder of what became USA Triathlon, and at the time the only really sort of zealot who was looking at the International Federation. And the reason for that is, Mike, I understood how the Olympic movement worked,
Mhm.
from governing bodies to international federations to national Olympic committees.
Yeah.
Little known fact, in 1978, I sat on a panel with three other athletes in front of Senator Ted Stevens at the time, and we testified on the value and benefit of what became the Amateur Sports Act in 1978, which paved the way for national governing bodies to run their own sports, for international federations to do their thing. And based on that experience, not only did I create what became the Olympic distance format, which debuted in 2000 in Sydney, Australia, but it
Wow.
also was the impetus to create and found these two organizations, one at the USA national governing body level, the other at the World Triathlon level. And as a result of all of that, you were correct earlier on. I was blessed to have been inducted in both of those halls of fame.
Yeah, to be recognized for those are groundbreaking efforts, Carl. I mean, I want to take a moment. That I mean, you are very humble, and your pronouns of we and are clearly heard in there. However, that's no small feat, man. So you talk about a bold decision. It didn't exist before, yet it was something that you felt like. What was the catalyst for you to say, "Well, hey, why not take that?" I understand the rationale to share back with corporate to say, "Hey, this will help broaden our brand appeal. It's going to do a lot of things for the business." But I'm curious about what was the catalyst that got you thinking of, hmm, why don't we do something like this? Do you remember what that might have been? Was that, I mean, one of those like shower moments or like three in
Well,
the,
whether it was shower or, taking a swim in the pool or having a beer with my mates, I don't know what the exact answer to that is.
yeah,
I will tell you that from my earliest memory of thinking this was possible, I
yeah.
had a vision
Hmm.
that triathlon belonged in the Olympic Games. It belonged on the Olympic program. And it was never going to get there using the Ironman format. The powers that be were just never going to do that, because at the time, the longest event in Olympic competition, men, women, or otherwise, was the full marathon event. It was,
Hmm.
2 hours and 20 minutes for the men and little longer than that for the women. In fact, the women didn't even get a full marathon in the Olympic Games until not that long ago. It's a true story. So what, and I want to underscore this for our listeners. And it goes back to that Goethe quote. If you can see it, the power of that vision is remarkable. You don't know what steps are going to need to be taken between, oh, I think this would be cool, and actually having it happen. So, the early spade work started, and I'll date myself here, even though you said I was a young man. In 1981, the series debuted in 1982, and it was multi-city. It was 5 cities at its launch. It was 12 cities in year 2, and for the follow-on 10 or 12 years, it was somewhere between 10 and 14 cities every single year. And what that allowed for was a populist movement in the sport of triathlon, because our series became the gold standard. It was called the US Triathlon Series. We had very strong sponsorship from Anheuser-Busch, from AT&T, from Coca-Cola. It was really cool. So from inception in, call it 1981, to a watershed moment in 1992, because we had formulated what then was called the International Triathlon Union, and myself, and he's now deceased, but the first ITU president, Les McDonald, Canadian, lived in Vancouver. He and I chased the IOC all around the world. Every time they had a meeting, we'd show up, and we were lobbying. We're lobbying for the inclusion of the sport of triathlon in the Olympic Games. And in 1992, in the spring, I want to say it was April, mind you, Samaranch is still the IOC president. And Barcelona later that summer is going to host the Olympic Games. So the IOC session took place in Barcelona. We were there. And the IOC executive session was happening in the hotel. We were in the lobby along with many other quote unquote lobbyists, not to be confused with the hotel lobby.
Right.
And the meeting breaks and they come out, and Samaranch sees us. And Les and myself, he walks straight up to us and he reaches out his hand and he shakes our hands and says, "Congratulations. The International Triathlon Union has just been recognized by the IOC." And we said, "Thank you very much." And I looked at Les and I said, "What the heck does that mean?" And he goes, "I have no idea. I have no idea what that means." So what we come to find out a few weeks later is that recognition built an exclusive fence globally around the International Triathlon Union as the one and only international federation to manage the sport of triathlon. And 12 months later, the IOC session voted to put us on the Olympic program in Sydney in 2000. Yeah.
That's just unbelievable. I mean, I thank you so much for sharing that, Carl, because it's one thing to say I had a vision for this and then to work it through, but to understand the steps that it takes and the work that it takes and the persistence that it takes. I imagine to an extent of patience, right? I like to call it patient persistence, that we're the process has to work itself through. And obviously the IOC had their process, but to see that come through, man, there are few times in people's lives, if ever, that they get to be part of something as seminal as that moment where a movement is not just sort of born, but recognized, and to see what it's grown into today. I mean, the global phenomena that is triathlon is unbelievable.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't say it any better than that, Mike. But I will say that when I reflect on it, I do pinch myself because you get to the end of the road, so to speak, and the road goes on forever, right? But the party never ends. The fact of the matter is that had the collective we, because nobody does it on their own, realized or knew what it was going to take to get where we ultimately got, I'm not sure anybody would have signed up, right? It was amazing because in order to get the IOC recognition, we had to navigate some significant political battles regionally around the world. The European group formed a confederation and believed that we were headed down the wrong path, that the Ironman format was really the one that should be adopted. And we went through hammer and tong, but ultimately we arrived at consensus, and the rest is history, so to speak.
Wow. Yeah, I'm a big believer. You said something earlier in this story that I think was super important, and it was just a little glimpse. Yet I think that leaders find themselves in these situations more often than not, where they have a vision of something, yet you had mentioned it's like we had the vision, but we had no idea how we were going to get from here to here. There wasn't quite the playbook per se. I mean, yes, there were steps you had to take. You understood the framework of how the system operated. Yet, I really believe that there are times as leaders that we aren't asked to know what steps 5, 6, 7, and 8 are supposed to be. All we're being asked to do is take steps 1 and steps 2. And I don't know about you, Carl, but my experience has been that if I take steps 1 and 2 with intentional action, it's amazing the ideas, the resources, the connections or relationships that show up that help you get to steps 3 and 4, and then how that process continues to repeat itself. But it takes us taking those first couple of steps. Some may say a leap of faith or leap into faith or some courage or just, hey, we've got nothing to lose. But that was a takeaway for me when you mentioned that kind of step back. And I have 4 words on an index card on my desk here that I look at every day, and it's simply intentional action drives clarity. And if we can
Oh,
take intentional steps each day, the clarity starts to show up, whether it's this was a good idea or this was a bad idea and I need to pivot. But I think it's that action that leaders in these times of taking vision to creation need to lean into. Is that something that you might have felt of value, or does that resonate with you?
oh, it totally resonates. It totally resonates. You hear it every which way but loose. If you don't have a destination, you're not going to get there.
No.
Okay. That's the vision. So you
Yes.
have this vision, and I'll go back to the triathlon story. Okay. I have no idea how long it's going to take. Would have much preferred for it to have been in 1988 and not the year 2000.
Yeah.
But to your point, we had to go through process. So there were some building blocks that I knew were obvious. And
Mhm.
that was there had to be a format that was widely popular, that the powers that be at the IOC could look at, hear about, watch, and understand simply. So
Mhm.
1,500-meter swim, longest then swimming competition in the Olympics, 40K bike ride, that's a time trial distance in cycling, and a 10K run. Who doesn't know what a 10K run is? So you put those 3 together and you get this adoption that sort of springboards around the world. I won't say simultaneously, but close to it.
Mhm.
So now you have a format that we think is sellable to the IOC. Then you need some infrastructure, which is the national governing body, the international federation model. Those 2 things had to be in place. The International Federation for obvious reasons, but every country that was participating in triathlon had to form their own national governing body. We weren't going to build the Canadian one or the German one or the French one or the Japanese one. We we're going to do any of that. They had to do it on their own. But the good news is, as those things came to be at the national governing body level around the world, they immediately signed on to the International Triathlon Union and acknowledged that the ITU was the international federation. So those were the sort of fundamental requirements and building blocks. There obviously had to be rules, regulations, what you could do, what you couldn't do. There had to be course descriptions. There had to be all these component parts of the event itself that were required.
Yeah.
But there also had to be media, media coverage, television, and sponsorship. And I understood all of those, and that was the recipe, Mike. I can't tell you I knew that it was 3 ounces of this and 6 ounces of that, but I knew what the ingredients were for the recipe. And we figured out the right configuration year after year, as I won't say trial and error, but as we learned, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Refining it, building it, learning, sharpening the saw. Every experience, I'm sure. Sorry, my Long Island came out there for a second. I am sure, just help to refine the experience, right? Not only for you or the competitors, but also the team,
Yeah,
everyone
for
who
sure.
is experiencing it.
Everyone.
Yeah, that is fantastic. So on this journey of leadership, has there been a principle that you've leaned into that has shown itself to you that might seem a bit unconventional, but it's really served you well on your path? I mean, this has been an incredible ride that we've gone through, and I'm so grateful for you sharing it. And I'm sure that there's something you lean into that continues to help you. Maybe it's your North Star, but what is that principle, Carl?
Right. Well, there are a couple of things, and listen, Mike, I'm not sure anybody's going to reinvent the wheel on that question. It would be that we all had something that nobody else had, and it was the magic bullet, right?
Well,
Pretty much not the case. I'll go back to I think it's probably a recipe,
mhm.
and the inclusive parts of the recipe, and I talked about it earlier on, was the culture, the accessibility, the vulnerability, the willingness to communicate. And I could wrap that into a phrase called servant leadership.
Mm,
At the end of the day, as a leader, you work for the team. The team doesn't work for you. Yes, you're the leader. Yes, they might roll up to you in a reporting environment, but your job as the leader is to provide clear vision, clarity, and I think you used that word around the mission, and then give your team all the tools, all the support you are able to, so that they are successful individually and that their success contributes to the overall success of the team.
yeah, yeah. That's so wise, and I believe that for young leaders, emerging leaders, this is a great perspective to have to evolve and grow into. I have to imagine that early on in this my experience, I think that is spot on looking back, right? So, for seasoned leaders that are listening here, and you're thinking about, where's an area I could get 1% better? Where's that intentional or present place I could be as a leader? This is a great message to lean into. And for younger emerging leaders, this is a great lesson and mantra to aspire to as you
Yeah, and I'll,
are.
and I'll make the point.
Yeah,
As a young leader or an emerging young leader, this is not intuitive.
right.
I learned this over 30 plus years of screwing up. Okay, making mistakes. Okay. The good news is we're all going to make mistakes. The better news is if we're smart and wise, to use your word, we can
Mhm.
learn from those mistakes. So when you're a young gun or a young guness, what you're going to do is likely you're going to be very focused on self. What can I do to perform? What can I do to make a difference? What can I
Mhm.
do to be noticed? What can I
Right.
do to get promoted?
Yeah.
Now, that's human nature.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nobody's saying that's wrong necessarily, but it's not the only thing,
Mhm.
because I say it all the time. None of us gets to where we are by ourselves. And that's the essence of my podcast, The Best Boss Ever.
Yeah.
What did you learn from the best boss you ever had? And what attributes are you taking from that leader, that boss, that mentor, that coach that
Yeah.
still are with you today and
Mhm.
inform your leadership style? As importantly, what did you learn from the not so good bosses that you had? And sort of what not to do and what not to be, right? So
Yeah.
it's a formula, if you will, or an equation. It's not just um, a single thing. But I will say that as a leader or as the leader, um, while you make your team better, while you are a servant leader, at the end of the day, the really tough calls that nobody's willing to make or can make or has the authority to make that end up on your desk, you got to make the tough call. And listen, it's easy, right, to call on a basketball court, a player's foot is on the sideline, ergo out of bounds turnover.
Yeah.
It's really hard to call the close charge or a block call, right? Was that a charge or was that a block? And many times those calls actually turn the tide of the game. So listen, you in decision making, you gather all the information you can for as long a time as you have until the decision time has come.
Yeah.
You never delay a decision past when either you've been told or directed it's decision time, or whether your internal mechanism has said, I got to make the decision by this date.
Yeah.
So you gather as much information, as much counsel as you can up until that decision making point, and then just make the call, right?
Yep.
And sometimes, hopefully more often than not, it's going to be the right call,
Yeah.
but it ain't going to be the right call every time.
Not every time. No,
Nope.
and that's the courage. That's where, as a leader, you've got to have that courage. You know. So, Carl, this has been absolutely phenomenal. I would never say to diminish the hard work that goes into earning a gold medal in any Olympic game. However, I feel like you've been giving out gold medals this entire conversation of this insight and knowledge. And I mean, going back to the beginning, I want to capture some of this here for us in the audience, and hopefully you all at home have been taking notes on this as well. But this idea of building cultures before you need to lean into them, and having cultures of accessibility and transparency and vulnerability, so important. This concept of lead from the front, show up, get your hands dirty, get shoulder to shoulder with your team. There's nothing that will replicate your support of them, the mission, and your commitment to them and the mission than standing there along with them, getting sweaty blisters on the hands, right? The idea of the better mousetrap theory, I think that is so smart and simple of how can we apply something that looks very intriguing, that's relatable to what we can do, but how do we make it more relatable to the people we want to connect with? If you're looking at it through a brand lens, the idea of broadening your brand appeal through this type of work, understanding the framework, right, of how things have to get done. It's not enough as leaders to have a vision of something. We have to understand how it can work within the structures that are there. How do we work the systems and navigate that as a leader to help bring these visions to life? I think that was gold of what you had to do there, Carl. The idea of not just having the vision, but believing in it, the persistence to bring it to life, building the bridge to the people by also educating them on the value and the benefit of that, and the mechanics of how it's going to work. Not maybe knowing every single detail, but enough of the mechanics that leave space for the team to step in and do some of the work, put their fingerprint on it, let them be part of that process and solution, which then allows you to continue to see the big picture, right? We were talking about that. The power of that perspective is so vital. And man, then wrapping up with this whole idea around and reminder of the power of servant leadership, that you work for the team. You're there to provide the clarity in the tools, and then perhaps get the heck out of the way and let the people do the work that you've hired them to do. Man, I don't know. I mean, just going through that right now is like a master class in not only leadership, but also brand and strategy and creating programs, right, from scratch, but having these show up on a global international stage. Carl, I can't thank you enough, man. This has been absolutely fantastic. Is there anything that we didn't cover, or do you want to talk a little bit of, I mean, your Best Boss Ever program and platform is so exciting. Is there anything you want to share with the audience on that they can learn more about?
Oh, absolutely. We're wrapping up season 4 in the next 4 weeks, 24 episodes. Season 5 will start in mid to late October. But we're so easy to find, Mike. It's the Best Boss Ever. That's simple. YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Those are the big 3. Of course, if you listen to podcasts via iHeart, you can find it there. But yeah, we've had some amazing guests, and you've listened to a couple of those, and I know you know that. And just for all your listeners, you are going to be a guest in season 5 on the Best Boss Ever podcast.
Looking forward to it.
All
Thank
that
you.
said, I would say that one of the key things, not just in leadership, but in parenthood, in
Hmm.
life in general.
Yeah.
You can, focus on the things that you can control. Because there's
Yeah.
a lot of things you can't control. We couldn't control the weather in Chicago. What we
Right.
could control was showing up as the storm blew through, picking up the pieces and getting it ready, to your point, to be good enough for 25 athletes to show up in 5 hours.
Right.
So that's a really important, I think, thing, because a lot of times the sort of dish runs away with the spoon, right? We go
Right.
down the rat hole of what if, what about, how come, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
When
Yeah.
it's
Why
real,
us?
right? It's really about do the obvious and control what you can control.
Yeah. And Carl, for me and listeners here have heard me speak on this before. I really believe there are only four things that we can control, my friend, and that's our attitude, our decisions, our behavior, and our energy. It's how we choose to think, what we decide to do, how we act, and then how we choose to show up. Other than that, I can't control anything else.
No, I
Right.
think that's right. That's right. I have a similar acronym. It's called CADET: character, attitude, drive, energy, and talent.
There you go, friends. And there's the gold medal. We're on the podium. This is phenomenal. Carl, thank you so much for your time. Just great conversation, insights, learning here as well. And for the listeners out there and viewers, thank you so much. I hope you're taking away from this as much as I've been able to, and as generous as Carl has been with his knowledge and experience and his passion for leadership. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, some of your takeaways as well. Please feel free to drop them in the comments or drop a line as well. And remember, until next time we connect here on the show, just remember that your best is yet to come. Cheers.